Ready, Alex? All right. Good morning, all, and welcome to the First Unitarian Church of Alton. Greetings also to those who are watching this service remotely. Everybody say hi. Hi. Okay, cool. Also, if you're here for the first time and I see some unfamiliar faces, welcome. We're glad that you're here and sharing in our service. And if you need some more information, I believe there's some information. There's an information card in the pews, and you can fill that out if you want to get some more information about our church and things like that. If not, come see me after the service and we can talk a little bit about what you can do to learn more about us. I'm Robin Berkeley. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm the president of this congregation, and I also serve as a worship associate. The First Unitarian Church of Alton is a small congregation in Alton, Illinois, currently spiritually led by the Reverend Krista Taves, but in July 2023, the Reverend Dr. Claudia Hall will take over her responsibilities as our minister, and we are very excited about that. In the pulpit today, we have Kara Lane, who is a teacher at Edwardsville High School here in Illinois, and who has done some research on the Transcendentalism movement and in its long history, and really embedded in that is UU history, because so many of the Transcendentalists were UUs. So we'll learn a little bit more about that history and how it connects to who we are. We're grateful for her presence today and her willingness. Good morning. Hi. And her willingness to share her perspective on the impact of Transcendentalism on society today. The mission of the First Unitarian Church drives us to live our values. We are outward reaching, inward seeking. We're creating and nurturing an intentional community that values acceptance, social justice, and the embodiment of UU principles. Come, let us question together. I'm so glad you're here, whether in the sanctuary or online. We welcome everyone to this home of comfort, spirit, justice, and hope. We are Unitarian Universalists. We open our service with a prelude by our accompanist, John. Thank you, one of my favorites. An important ritual in the Unitarian Universalist faith is the lighting of our chalice. Unitarian Universalists have many different interpretations of the flaming chalice, including the light of reason, the warmth of community, and the flame of hope. Please join me in celebrating all of these reasons and more. And if you're watching elsewhere and have a chalice or candle handy, please light it now as we all join in saying the unison words projected on the screen above. We hallow this time together by kindling the lamp of our heritage. I welcome Tara for the opening prayer.
I have chosen the poem Robin Hood by Kate Bayer, and it's pulled from this collection of poetry called What Kind of Woman? And before I share this prayer, I just wanted to give a little bit of context for why I chose it, because I think it goes thematically with the topic I'm going to talk about today, about being deliberate, about simplifying our lives in a way where we cut those things that detract our sense of self, that take away from the joy that's in our lives, so that we can really focus on what brings us joy and live with an intentionality and purpose. So, Robin Hood by Kate Bayer. Imagine if we took back our diets, our grand illusions, the time spent thinking about the curve of our form. Imagine if we took back every time we called attention to one or the other, her body, our body, the bad shape of things. Imagine the minutes that would stretch into hours, day after day, stolen back like a thief. Imagine the power of loose arms and assurance, the years welcomed home in a soft cotton dress.
Our first hymn is number 44 in the Gray Hymnal. We sing of golden morning, and we'll begin. So you can see the words up there. Please rise if you are in spirit or body. Sing of sparkling seas, of prairies, valleys, mountains, and stately forest trees. We sing of marching sunshine and life bestowing rain, of birds among the branches and springtime wind. We sing the heart courageous, the youthful eager born. We sing of hopes undaunted, of friendly wave and fun. We sing of roses waiting beneath the deep piled snows. We sing the earth's great splendor, whose beauty round us glows. Beautiful, thank you. You okay? Okay, didn't want to lose you. Today's message is about the Transcendentalist movement. There are two principles that resonate with this message. Number one is the fourth UU principle, the free and responsible search for truth and meaning. That's fundamental to Transcendentalism. And the seventh UU principle, respect for the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part, also central to the Transcendentalist movement. There's a strong interdependence between our UU history and the Transcendentalists, and Kara shares her views on this based on her own studies and interests in this part of history, American history specifically. As part of our weekly, excuse me. Okay, I'm good. As part of our weekly worship service, we take time for the expression of joys, concerns, or sorrows. In front of us is a bowl of water and stones available to place in the bowl representing your joys and concerns. Please start at my right, proceed to the left, here to my left. Take a moment to stop and reflect and send your energy out to the universe. Place your stone or stones in the water. If you're home, please feel free to place a stone in the bowl of water or offer your joys and sorrows to the universe. We have stones up here. We also have stones at the back, so please feel free to proceed that way and pick up stones in either location. I want to say Happy Pride Month, which I should have said at the very beginning, but I wanted to make sure I made note of it today, right now. We're under a lot of attack right now, the LGBT community, and so I want to send out my energy in the universe. I was really heartened to see that the courts have struck down the anti-drag amendment in Tennessee. So that's some promising and heartening news. So anyway, happy Pride, and we'll have rainbows here soon, I promise. Just, it's been a busy week. Okay, so our next hymn is number 4, I Brought My Spirit to the Sea. Practice that one more, folks. We're good. We haven't sang that. I can't remember the last time we sang that one. I don't know if we ever have in my time here anyway. So anyway, nice effort. Appreciate that. Okay. So today's reading is an excerpt from an essay by Ralph Waldo Emerson. What a surprise. Titled Nature. It was found on the American Transcendentalism web, which I won't get into the website address, but if you're interested, we have that available to you. Our age is retrospective. It builds the sepulchres of the fathers. It writes biographies, histories, and criticism. The foregoing generations beheld God and nature face to face, we through their eyes. Why should not we also enjoy an original relation to the universe? Why should not we have a poetry and philosophy of insight and not of tradition, and a religion by revelation to us and not the history of theirs? Embosomed for a season in nature, whose floods of life stream around and through us and invite us by the powers they supply to action proportioned to nature, why should we grope among the dry bones of the past or put the living generation into masquerade out of its faded wardrobe? The sun shines today also. There is more wool and flax in the fields. There are new lands, new men, new thoughts. Let us demand our own works and laws and worship. Undoubtedly, we have no questions to ask which are unanswerable. We must trust the perfection of the creation so far as to believe that whatever curiosity the order of things has awakened in our minds, the order of things can satisfy. Every man's condition is a solution in hieroglyphic to those inquiries he would put. He acts it as a life before he apprehends it as truth. In like manner, nature is already, in its forms and tendencies, describing its own design. Let us interrogate the great apparition that shines so peacefully around us. Let us inquire, to what end is nature? All science has one aim, namely, to find a theory of nature. We have theories of races and of functions, but scarcely yet a remote approach to an idea of creation. We are now so far from the road to truth that religious teachers dispute and hate each other, and speculative men are esteemed unsound and frivolous. Kind of sounds familiar. But to a sound judgment, the most abstract truth is the most practical. Whenever a true theory appears, it will be its own evidence. Its test is that it will explain all phenomena. Now, many are thought not only unexplained, but inexplicable, as language, sleep, madness, dreams, beasts, sex. Philosophically considered, the universe is composed of nature and the soul. Strictly speaking, therefore, all that is separate from us, all which philosophy distinguishes as the not me, that is both nature and art, all other men and my own body, must be ranked under this name, nature. In enumerating the values of nature and casting up their sum, I shall use the word in both senses, in its common and in its philosophical import. In inquiries so general as our present one, the inaccuracy is not material. No confusion of thought will occur. Nature, in the common sense, refers to essences unchanged by man, space, the air, the river, the leaf. Art is applied to the mixture of his will with the same things as in a house, a canal, a statue, a picture. But his operations taken together are so insignificant, a little chipping, baking, patching, and washing, that in an impression so grand as that of the world on the human mind, they do not vary the result. Okay, I'm going to hand it over to Kara now to talk about her message, and she'll have a slideshow as well, so she'll point to that as need be.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for having me today. It is an honor to be with you. As Dr. Berkeley mentioned, I am Kara Lane. I have been a teacher of English for 20 years at Edwardsville High School. I'm originally from Indiana and moved here for the job and have really enjoyed being a part of the community. Actually moved from one Madison County to another Madison County. So I think that was interesting for sure. Certainly, I could go on and on. I've been studying transcendentalism. I teach American literature. And so I get to talk about these people every single year, which is wonderful. And then so having an opportunity to share this with a wider audience besides 17-year-olds is really fantastic as well. But they're fairly receptive to this kind of thing. The reaction that I usually get is that the kids like to come back from winter break and learn about these folks because it's such a respite from some of the other things that we talk about, and particularly because we just finished up research. So they're glad to be done with that project and moving on. So the focus of today, so we're on the next slide, is to give you an overview of the cast of characters that we have, to define their beliefs, which some of you are going to be pretty familiar with, and then touch on the legacy of their work, how there is such a strong connection among them, and how the single most important driving force beyond a shared philosophy, at least in the beginning, was a shared place. So the next slide here, yes, this is perfect, is why is it that some places go down in history? Italy during the European Renaissance, Philadelphia during the American Revolution, Boston and its outskirts, specifically a place called Concord, which is 23 miles northeast of Boston, during America's own Renaissance in the mid-1800s. How is it that all of these people were in the right place at the right time? Well, some of that was by design, but other aspects of it appear to be destiny. These are the things that I would like you to think about this morning. How would someone like Ralph Waldo Emerson see a group like ourselves today? We're all here because we share something in common. Our specific reasons for spending a few hours or minutes in this space right now, or even at home, online, may be different. But those varied paths led us to the same end, for this shared experience here. So in the spirit of Henry David Thoreau, let us take a look around at the people we are with, whom we get to share this morning. We've all got something to offer, and we've all experienced so much. Hopefully the joy has outweighed the pain, and my hope is that the subject of this morning's presentation and discussion inspires you to be a little bit more curious, a little bit more observant, and a little bit more appreciative of the life you get to live. All right, so this is Ralph Waldo Emerson. He is the center of the transcendentalist universe. And when we look at what is happening in Concord in the 1830s and 40s, that's not to say he's the most important person. That's certainly up for debate. But what is important is that he brought so many of the players of this group together, and he pushed to articulate that binding philosophy among 19th century thinkers. So here's a little bit of background on him. He was born and raised in Boston, where his father was a Unitarian minister. His name was Reverend William Emerson, and he was a leading member of the Boston elite. But his dad died when he was 8 years old. So that left Emerson to sort of seek his own way and have to find his own path. Emerson attended Harvard University, which was common for anybody who was going to go to college, especially in Massachusetts. And he graduated from Harvard at the age of 18. And he taught for a little while, which of course I love. And then he decided he was going to go to Harvard's Divinity School. It was at this time that he was inducted into the Phi Beta Kappa, which happens to be the oldest academic honor society in America. He was inducted in 1828. And that was the following year there is when he married a woman named Ellen Tucker. Now, unfortunately, Ellen passed away in 1831. So they had only been married for about 2 years. And by 1832, Emerson is at a real crossroads with his position as a minister in the Boston church. He has a problem with communion, or the Last Supper, and he doesn't feel that he should administer it anymore. His church says you should be administering this, and he can't reconcile that, so he leaves the church. And this is crucial. I share this anecdote with you because even though he is not saying the phrase self-reliance in his journals and letters and reflections, scholars point out that this is likely the first time that he has rejected the prescribed methods of action and is now becoming that free thinker that he is, because he's not bound by these traditions. He's being discerning about things. On the next slide, we have the Jardin des Plantes, and this is where he spends some important time. After he leaves the church in Boston, he spends nearly a year in Europe, and it is in Paris here that he notices all of the organization and classification of plants, and he starts really seeing the interconnectedness of it all, which Dr. Berkeley mentioned earlier about being all connected here. So here he is absorbing a new understanding of the world, one that is informed by science and nature, which of course we just heard from that excerpt of his essay, Nature, which he hasn't written yet at this point in time, rather than prescribed religion. Once Emerson is back in the United States for about a year, he decides to move northwest of Boston to Concord, where he will live in Old Manse. And Old Manse is the photograph there on the left. And this is a home that actually belonged to his grandmother and his step-great-grandfather. So a little bit of background information about his family lineage. I already mentioned that his father was a Unitarian minister. Well, so was his grandfather, but his grandfather died during the Revolutionary War after he left Fort Ticonderoga, and his grandmother remarried a man, so this would have been even when his father was very young, a man named Reverend Ezra Ripley, who served the Concord community as minister for 60 years. So you talk about a tradition that is deep-seated. So I also I thought this was maybe an appropriate time to mention the connections that you may or may not be aware of among the Unitarians that were in the Boston area in Massachusetts who actually moved to the Midwest, specifically William Greenleaf Eliot, who founded Washington. He was a co-founder with Wayman Crowe of Washington University, which was founded in 1853. And so there are some interesting connections there. And even though I don't teach William Greenleaf Eliot, I certainly do teach his grandson, T.S. Eliot, who was the Nobel Prize-winning author and poet of the 20th century. So it is here at Old Manse that he writes Nature. So I love that you brought that in today. That was perfect. He wrote that in an upstairs study in 1836. And the following year, he remarries to a woman named Lydia. He has sort of rejected this notion of being a Unitarian minister, but he is making a living off of his lectures. He tours all over the East Coast and even gets as far west as St. Louis, where, believe it or not, he does meet with William Greenleaf Eliot here in the St. Louis area and calls Eliot the Saint of the West. So that was on WashU's website when I was preparing for this lecture. I came across that. So I love the opportunity to continue doing more and more research because that's new for me. And it is at this time, as he's doing all of this work and giving lectures, that he actually invites a few friends to some meetings that will turn into the discussions then will evolve into their articulating their philosophy of transcendentalism. He ends up buying a permanent home for his family on a turnpike in town and calls it Bush. And I believe that's a picture I took when I got to go there to Concord. I did a teacher study there through the National Endowment for the Humanities in 2017, and it was such a joy to go there. For those of you, if you ever get the chance to go to this part of the country, I could not recommend it any more strongly because it's really fantastic, especially if you like history. So in 1837, the next slide here, perfect. This is the big year, August 31st. And by the way, I do see that this is right around the time that this church was founded, right? 1836, 1837. So just kind of putting those parallel timelines all together. On August 31st, he delivers his speech at the Phi Beta Kappa, now known as the American Scholar Speech, which is something else I get to teach as well. And this is where he articulates his philosophy on man thinking. Are we critical thinkers, or are we just repeating what we've been told, in one ear and then just doing it? So he's really rejecting this notion of being like, just you do what you're told. This is, again, that sort of notion of self-reliance where you're using your brain to not just parrot another man's thinking. That's a word that he uses often in that essay, is parrot. And in September, this Transcendentalism Club shakes things up and invites women to their meetings. This also includes a woman named Margaret Fuller, which is more on her in a minute. A Concord native also gets invited to this. He is freshly graduated from Harvard, and he and Emerson become very good friends, and that is my good friend, Henry David Thoreau. So I tell you all this biographical information before I share their philosophy because I'm hoping to illustrate that evolution of thought is informed by experience. These people have to live through these experiences. The crisis of Emerson losing his wife, of feeling like he's lost himself in his religion. These are the kinds of things that inform his philosophy, and I think in many ways are what make him so accessible. Here we are talking about him nearly 200 years later, and someone who's so important to the establishment of this very faith right here. So, the Harvard Divinity School, 1838. This is the year that Emerson gives his Divinity School address, where he articulates something so radical that Harvard will not invite him back for 3 decades. To you and me, with our 21st century lens, it's easy to overlook how controversial it would have been, especially since I kind of already referenced it in my introduction. But he dared to posit that there was a sacred divinity in each human being. And he dared to suggest that there was a humanity in Jesus, which had the effect of diminishing his divine status. And that was what was so controversial to the church and to Harvard. In July of 1840, that was the beginning of the Transcendentalist literary magazine, The Dial, which in its first 2 years is edited by Margaret Fuller, who I just mentioned a few moments ago. So what is Transcendentalism? From the biography entry on Ralph Waldo Emerson, these writers shared a key belief that each individual could transcend or move beyond the physical world of the senses into deeper spiritual experience through free will and intuition. In this school of thought, God was not remote and unknowable. Believers understood God and themselves by looking into their souls and by feeling their own connection to nature. I want to also put it another way. Emerson asserted that the human ability to transcend the material world of sense experience and facts and become conscious of the all-pervading spirit of the universe and the potentialities of human freedom. God could best be found by looking inward into one's own self and one's own soul, and from such an enlightened self-awareness would in turn come freedom of action and the ability to change one's world according to the dictates of one's ideals and consciousness. And so I do think it's important to say that the Transcendentalism unit philosophy is really an amalgam of so many different things, though, that are informed by this. This isn't an original idea per se, but what set Emerson apart from others was that he expressed, and what he was expressing in Transcendentalism was his ability to articulate those things and make them accessible, being a polished literary writer and speaker. And that's something that, you've got to get the message out there for it to resonate with people in the first place. So the next important person here, regarding all their musings on Transcendentalism. What is Transcendentalism? Let's talk and talk and talk and have these wonderful gatherings. But the person who actually says, I'm going to put Transcendentalism to the test is Henry David Thoreau. And it was on July 4th, 1845, that he goes into Walden Woods to the very site that Ralph Waldo Emerson had just purchased. He's in his late 20s by this time, having had a birthday just about a week and a half after starting his experiment. And what people maybe don't realize, and certainly my students don't realize at first, is that even though he moved into the woods, he did not reject society, and he certainly did not reject the warm relationships of his friends and family. There are those who misunderstand his goals. What changed over time, as it were, and believed that he was a hypocrite for his weekly Sunday dinners with his mom and sister at home and picnic lunches throughout the week with friends. The point is, he put himself into a situation where he could truly think, where he could evaluate his situation, his philosophy, with as little distraction as possible. It was here that he determined to, quote, simplify, 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 and alleviate the distractions from the daily grind that end up serving as obstacles to the task of thinking and reflecting. And that's what really brought me to the conclusion that the poem Robin Hood was something that, resonates, certainly at least with me, about those distractions and how we kind of get into our own heads. It doesn't matter how much technology has changed. Distractions are distractions, no matter what time period we live in. So even though we live in a very different world from Thoreau, I think that he might understand exactly what so many of us, particularly our younger generations, are going through. There's just so many things competing for our attention that we have to be deliberate and put ourselves in a situation where we can focus. So here he is out in this, what people of his time would call a writer's retreat. The biggest shocker to his community was that he actually lived in this particular space, though. In a time where these writers' retreats were all the rage, for someone to live in a space that was seen as a temporary respite, well, that's what made him stand out. And stand out he did. It was the most public, private experiment ever. And Thoreau had to navigate that fact that a lot of people in his community had public opinions about his actions, not to mention the criticism that happened in the century and a half since his death. Thoreau's connection to friends and family highlighted one of the main tenements of transcendentalism, that we are all connected. Not only did Thoreau have Emerson's blessing for this, but he also had the literal help of his friends and neighbors. Scholars believe that he borrowed the axe with which he used to cut the wood for his house from Bronson Alcott, a progressive thinker and activist in his own day, and maybe now is best known as being the father of Louisa May Alcott. Bronson Alcott, Emerson, and several other men most assuredly did help Thoreau raise the frame to his home. Transcendentalism champions self-reliance, and I think that this is where so many present-day misunderstandings come into play. This application is not about the strict isolation or only doing things by yourself. It's about having the guts to follow your own path. These men aided Thoreau's chosen path, and it was his path that represented self-reliance. And with that understanding, then it's easier to see why he would not have perceived his choice to then leave Walden Woods 2 years later as a failure of his project. He recognized that he was getting into his own daily grind, and he, quote, left the woods for as good a reason as he entered it. He had other lives to live. This notion of self-reliance is crucial when understanding the transcendentalist anti-slavery views. One's bodily, emotional, and intellectual autonomy was key to their philosophy, and anything that impeded that was a violation of those views. They acted on these views, and Concord was a stop on the Underground Railroad, which I'm sure, Alton, you're familiar with these notions as well. And a community that was all on the same page during these anti-slavery views was essential to success, particularly during the time of the Fugitive Slave Act. We know for a fact that Thoreau housed at least 2 individuals escaping slavery. The 2 years, 2 months, and 2 days that Thoreau spent at Walden Woods were a success. He worked on his manuscript for his first book, and he continued to write in his journal, which was suggested that he do that action by Ralph Waldo Emerson. And the entries from that time are what provided the source material for the book that would become Walden. Further, his act of living in Walden was symbolic, as he built the house that he had built literally from the ground up. He put himself in a position where he could, as he says, quote, meet the facts of life. And this was a spiritual act that he saw his cabin then as a temple. His goal, as stated at the beginning of Walden, was to, quote, live deliberately. And that is exactly what he did. There is one other piece of information during Thoreau's time at Walden that I think is particularly striking. Thoreau actually surveyed Walden Pond, and he was so careful, so deliberate, that modern surveyors have found that he was accurate in his measurements of its length, breadth, and depth down to the inch. And I want to be clear, that Walden Pond is not a pond. It's actually a lake, and it is the largest body of water in the state of Massachusetts. It is 61 acres in breadth, and it is 102 feet deep at its deepest. And when he realized this at the time as he was doing these cross sections of it, when he realized that the cross point between breadth and length also intersects with the deepest point of the water, he drew a parallel to the ethics of man. He said, "It is the heart in man. It is the sun in the system. Drawn lines through the length and breadth of the aggregate of man's particular daily experiences and volumes of life into his coves or inlets, and where they intersect will be the height or the depth of his character." Ultimately, though, Thoreau's time at Walden Pond highlighted a tension between wilderness and society. The reason Emerson bought up the land and the woods around his plot is because the railroad was moving in. And Thoreau pointed out that folks often get carried away by technology in our lives that is meant to make it better, but can often serve to make our lives more complicated. Quote, he says, "We do not ride upon the railroad, it rides upon us." By the time Thoreau left, the train was passing through Walden Woods 20 times a day. No wonder he wanted to leave. And one more comment about Thoreau's work in nature, because it connects to Emerson's observations. Journals of the growing seasons that Thoreau kept during his time are still being used today because he was so detailed in his work and was so consistent for so long that they're used to show climate change. That was one thing that was discussed when we went to Walden Pond and talked to some of the scientists there, that he's not just a writer, he's not just a thinker, he's not just a philosopher, he's also a scientist. So I think that he deserves credit for that. He doesn't often get discussed in that way. I'd like to go back to the women who were permitted entrance into the Transcendentalism Club at Emerson's home in Concord. One which I saw that we were looking at the poster out there of important Unitarians, and one of those was Elizabeth Palmer Peabody, who you may recognize as being, and I certainly do, as a pioneer in the field of education, specifically for her advocacy for kindergarten. And another was Margaret Fuller, a woman who published a book called Woman in the 19th Century in 1845, a book that is considered to be the first modern female treatise because it introduced themes that would become central to the feminist movement of the 20th century. Her book also served as inspiration to Elizabeth Cady Stanton, who I also saw on the poster out there, and other organizers for the Seneca Falls Women's Rights Convention, which occurred 3 years later in 1848 in Seneca Falls, New York. So how did she get to such a radical point in her life? Margaret Fuller was born near Harvard in 1810 and was treated as if she were a boy, or as much as possible. Let's see if your childhoods line up to this. She was learning Latin by the age of 6 and reading Ovid by 8. Her father put an enormous amount of pressure on her and micromanaged her education. I think we can all probably see how that might be a little bit stressful. While he was away serving as a politician, she was to write him every day to articulate what she was doing. By the way, he did not write to her every day. That should be noted. She had Harvard tutors and was eventually sent to an all-girls prep school in Connecticut because we can't get the women too educated or else they won't be able to get married. Of course, if she had been a man, she would have been admitted to Harvard. But as it were, she was the first woman granted access to Harvard College Library. And here the die is cast, for she had access to these resources and she could educate herself. A different road for self-reliance. She knew she was something special and stated, quote, I was not born into the common womanly lot. I don't know if I could have been friends with her. I don't know how easy that would have been. She did know. Yes. Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah. We would have definitely seen that there's a confidence in her. She's someone who is self-reflective, but she did suffer much from those external pressures imposed by her father. She said in her memoirs that children, quote, should not through books antedate their actual experiences, but should take them gradually so that sympathy and interpretation are needed. I think she would have understood how important recess is and how important it is for play, and that there's a time and a place for our experiences. In 1835, while Emerson was figuring out where to live and marrying Lydia and Thoreau was at Harvard, Margaret Fuller was taking on another man's role as primary caregiver to her family. She had to give up her path as a scholar and took on a role teaching to earn income, since unfortunately her father died without a will, and her uncles, who assumed financial control, did not treat her family well. One of her 5 brothers was a man named Arthur Buckminster Fuller. He became a Unitarian minister, and at the age of 40, he actually passed away. He died during the Civil War. I mention him, though, because he has a son named Richard Buckminster Fuller, so that would be Margaret Fuller's nephew, and that man became the father of the architect Buckminster Bucky Fuller, who is the person who was responsible for designing the geodesic dome at the Center for Spirituality and Sustainability over on SIU East Campus. And his design, of course, is what was used for the geodesic dome, the climatron at the Missouri Botanical Garden. And I think it's worth noting, as some of you I know already know this, that Buckminster Fuller said he was deeply influenced by the transcendentalism philosophy of his great aunt, Margaret Fuller. He was proud to have been related to her, and certainly, because I also saw it again on the poster out there, that of course Frank Lloyd Wright is a Unitarian, was part of the Unitarian community as well. So back to Margaret Fuller. So she is at the Temple School in Boston, which was founded by Bronson Alcott, Louisa May Alcott's father. And here's what's important about this. The school stressed individual development, moral principles, and practiced racial integration. It also encouraged its students to give free flight to their imaginations. So now our timelines are merging. Margaret is invited that fateful evening, the year of 1837, to attend the Transcendentalist meetings, and her work editing and contributing to the Dial is pivotal to her career. She publishes an essay called The Great Lawsuit in 1843, where she articulates the themes and arguments that she will later develop into that book, Woman in the 19th Century. And it was this essay that caught the attention of Horace Greeley, who offered her a position as a literary critic for the New York Tribune. This was a wonderful opportunity for Fuller, who broke much ground for women in the field of journalism. She is the first full-time book reviewer in American journalism. She is the first female editor of that publication, which she took on that role in 1846, and she is the first female foreign correspondent. She ended up going to England and to Italy. When she was doing her work abroad, she actually met a man with whom she became romantically engaged. She moved to Florence, Italy with him, and they have a child together. She does or does not marry him. No one's really sure. We have no record of them actually marrying, and decides after things in Italy do not go their way politically, that it's time to come back to America. We do know that we have letters she wrote to her mother saying that she was coming back with the grandson, Margaret Fuller's son, and this man that she is the father of her child. She refuses the money that Emerson offers for her tickets on a passenger ship, instead taking a cargo ship of Carrabba marble. There are only 6 passengers and a crew of less than 20 on this particular ship. They make their way all the way to the harbor of Fire Island, New York, where there is a terrible, terrible storm, and a ship that was that heavy from that marble, likely hitting a sandbar, caused the marble to shift and tear a hole in the ship. Unable to swim, she gives her toddler son to a crew member and awaits her fate. Unfortunately, this was the same fate for her child and the father of her child as well. At Emerson's urging, Henry David Thoreau went to Fire Island looking on the shore for any of her possessions. And I just can't imagine being such good friends with somebody and then having to go and take on that task. But that is what Henry David Thoreau did. Only the little boy's body was recovered, along with a few personal effects. Even though Margaret Fuller's life was cut tragically short, her work survives, and she has provided inspiration for many people, women and men, over the last 178 years. She may not be as well known as Emerson or Thoreau, but it is my hope that this morning's lecture has either reminded you about her or sparked an interest in her life and work to find out more. After all, the crux of the Transcendentalist work was not about following their paths, but being inspired by their actions to follow our own. And as I wrap up here, I'd like to share just a few more things. John Muir, who I think was really connected to that last song that we sang together about, finding that spirituality and that guidance among the trees. He was certainly somebody who used his pen the way that Emerson did to articulate how important nature is. You may, of course, I also passed the office for the Sierra Club on my way here, so he is instrumental in that. And not every person is someone who utilizes, not every person who advocates for nature uses their pen. There's also Ansel Adams, who was a photographer who used his camera to capture pristine wilderness images, and they do their own kind of talking. His photographs of Kings Canyon were used in Congress. They were actually displayed in Washington, D.C., and used to persuade people to vote, and vote they did, to secure Kings Canyon as a national park, which it became, I believe, in 1940. So, as we go to this very last slide here, let us all find inspiration for that self-growth as we observe the gifts offered by nature, other individuals, and those gifts within ourselves. Explore the national and state parks. Look around this beautiful river town, or take a drive along the Mississippi River, or visit the Missouri Botanical Garden. And don't be afraid to examine your own backyard. Who knows what secrets of the cosmos will be revealed with just one deliberate look. Thank you for listening, and thank you for being you.
I'll have to tell you, Edwardsville High School is very lucky to have you. They are. And I'll let the principal know that. Just, you're clear. Make sure we know. So, not that I know him or her, but it's always good to know. But the effort's there. We're going to go with our final hymn, number 175. We celebrate the web of life appropriately. So thank you, Joy. Well, folks, it's that time of year. It is stewardship time. Hopefully by now you've gotten your mailing and or an email reminder. Currently we are at $41,400, which is slightly above 50% of our campaign goal, which is $80,000. If you have not already donated or filled out your pledge card, please do so. You should have, like I said, you should have already gotten an email reminder. We can only achieve what we want to achieve with financial help. As we move to our new location, your support is so important for our continued existence and success. But also remember that stewardship is both financial donations as well as volunteering your time, talent, and treasure. We continue to need support for worship, which I'll have a word or two on that in a moment. Coffee hour, thank you, Mary, for taking care of that today. And ushering, Lane, thank you very much for your help on that as well. If you can't write a check, please help our church survive and thrive by offering your time to help. Please give what you can because all of your gifts are needed for our church to prosper. You can also mail your financial gift to the First Unitarian Church, P.O. Box 494 in Alton. Or you can also give on Givelify or PayPal, and those links are on our website, so feel free to donate through that. If you want to donate your time or talent, just let me know at the end of service, and I'm happy to find something to keep you busy. No worries there. So please, if we can do our offertory, I would appreciate that, Lane. Thank you. Thank you. Awesome. Please join with me in our offering prayer. May this offering equip us to inspire love and seek justice. Okay, I got a bunch of announcements. Bear with me. Buckle in. First of all, our annual meeting is coming up in July. I believe it's the 16th. I think it's the 16th because I'm out of town on the 9th, so it has to be the week after that. So it'll be the 16th. I also want to make a recommendation, and it inspired me from some of the things you were talking about in terms of women's rights movements and things like that. I went to see a play Thursday night called Gloria. It's at the JCC. I highly recommend it if you can go see it. It's really outstanding. It talks about Gloria Steinem and her role in the movement, obviously. So if you get a chance to see it, please do. A couple of other things. Number one, as you all know, or maybe you don't know, we had issues with sort of the septic backing up downstairs in the basement. And we had it, I think we told you we had it augured. So it's been cleared out. There was all sorts of stuff in there. And then we noticed that there was a small section that needed some repairs. We originally thought we were going to have to swallow that cost. And I thank God for Cardinal Catastrophe because they did some investigation and found out that that was Illinois Water's easement. So Illinois Water fixed it last week, and we should be good to go. So we're just working out the final details with the insurance company, with Church Mutual, to replace some of the tiles that we recently replaced because of the broken pipe in January. And so they're working out the details for replacing some of the baseboard and some of the tiles in the basement. Just want to keep you up to date on what's going on there. In terms of the easement, it passed last Wednesday, so we have the permanent easement approved. City Council approved that. I did communicate with the people who were interested in buying the building, and they have made a decision for personal reasons, has nothing to do with us, that they are not prepared to pursue interest in purchasing the building. So the board and we're reconvening our discussion on how we're going to handle the selling of the building as the next option. On that note, on the flip side of that, we have narrowed down. If you attended the town hall a couple of weeks ago, you were involved in the discussion. You knew where we were at in terms of some of the places that we visited. We went through the whole scope of things. If you would like to have access to that video, Alex has created a YouTube link that we were more than happy to share with you what our discussion was about, what we were looking at. So just let me know and I can get that YouTube link to you. on that note, we narrowed it down to basically two choices, and one of them is St. Paul's UCC, which is on University Drive South, heading off of 270 and up into the SIUE campus. It's a small, lovely UCC church on the left-hand side, is right by the bike path there. We had a wonderful visit with them this week, very open, wonderful connection and interdependent values that we think will work very well. So we discussed some details, and we're waiting to hear back from them about whether or not that works for their board and how they want to handle things like service at time and stuff like that. Right now they meet at 10:15, and we were asking them to pitch, maybe go back a little bit sooner so that we could find a meeting time for us at like 11 or 11:15, as opposed to too much later in the afternoon. So that's one of many things that we're in discussion over, but none of it's unsurmountable. It's all pretty much just, can we make that work and negotiate through those things. We have one other location that I'm waiting to hear back from about whether or not we could connect with their board this month, which is Emmanuel Methodist, which is on Main Street in Edwardsville, and we would have primary access and primary control over a space in their basement area, which is a nice space. It has its pros and cons, as you'll hear if you were involved in the meeting. But we're just waiting to hear back from them. And we'll, again, I can't report anything more than that on that space until we actually have a chance to talk with the full board in more detail. I'm hoping to have some information on that for this month. And if not, then we have to make a decision about how we want to proceed as a board from there. Okay, next thing, announcements. I think in the newsletter you probably saw that I was supposed to talk about radical amazement, and I've changed my mind because I'm entitled to do that. Because we all can, right? We can all do that. So I don't know how many of you have watched Ted Lasso. Yes, some of you are nodding. Some of you probably have no idea what I'm talking about, and that's fine. Ted Lasso is this amazing, amazing show on Apple TV, and the theme for the show is belief. And so I think Ted Lasso is a secret Unitarian. So I'm going to actually talk about Ted Lasso and also about how some of the lessons we learned from that show relate to Unitarian Universalism. So just letting you know that. Go through my list. In terms of an update, for those of you that don't know, a couple of years ago we had an embezzlement that happened in the church, and we were ready to settle with him last April, about a little over a year ago, and he disappeared. Like, poof, like went underground, disappeared. Well, we found him. I can't give you more details than that. Just know that we have already put that information out to the state's attorney, and he is pursuing what he can for extradition. But he was very public in Twitter, which was sort of surprising. But we did find him, which was good. Second to last to deal with, I'm looking for ideas for the summer for people to be in the pulpit to support us. I know that Claudia will be here. As you know, I'm happy to fill in where I can as well in terms of sermons. But I think it would be helpful if we had some wonderful creative ideas from people who you think might want to provide a message here in the pulpit. And if you're in the audience and going, oh, I can't think of something I would want to speak about, we have lots of access to sermons on our worship web. And if you just want to be up here to share and read a message, we would welcome that as well. I don't want you to be afraid because, my first time up here, I was shaking in my boots, but Lane was here. I'm sure you remember. But it's a really rewarding experience, as I'm sure Sarah can attest to. So whatever message, resonates with your heart, we're welcome here to hear it. So if you have some ideas of people that I can invite, or if you're interested yourself, please let me know. I would welcome that. Lastly, we have Pride celebrations upcoming. Number one is St. Charles Pride is looking for volunteers, and this would be in conjunction with Emerson Chapel in St. Charles, and they have a booth, and they invited us to participate with them if we choose to. So if anybody is interested in volunteering, have to be there all day, but if you want to go for a couple of hours to help support some combined efforts, that would be really wonderful. I would appreciate that. I think it's going to be on the 17th of June. We also have a Tower Grove Pride. We're going to be working with Elliott and with First Church to have a booth at Tower Grove Pride in September. And lucky us, we paid for a booth last year and we couldn't fill it because we had a lot of things going on at that time. So we've already paid for the booth. And so I'm offering that to those 3 churches. And so we will be there in September in conjunction with them. But I'm just putting you on notice that we're going to need some support manning that booth or personing that booth, if I want to be gender neutral there, in Tower Grove in September. We also have Unity Fest, which will be in Edwardsville the last weekend in September, I think the last Saturday. We had people there last year. They loved the experience. And what Unity Fest is just a way for all sorts of churches to come together in the area to talk about the unity and the interdependence of our faith traditions. And I think it's just a great space for us to just express who we are. So again, keep that in mind. And that Metro East Pride will be sometime down in Belleville, usually in the beginning of October. So that's another element. And also, happy birthday to Jesse and Marcella, who's in the back. We celebrated their birthday last night, so Jesse grunts and groans over here. You don't know why. Still hurting, but it's okay. We had a good time. So Jesse was last week and Marcella's next week. So anyway, just want to let you know about that. All right. Anything else anybody needs to know or wants to ask while I'm here? All right, good. We want to get out of here. I get it. All right, we're going to extinguish our chalice. So I invite you to join me in reciting a prayer as I extinguish the chalice. The light of truth and meaning cannot be put out. We are keepers of this flame until we meet again. Our closing words today are from the Gray Hymnal, number 686 by Mark Bellatini. Go in peace. Live simply, gently, at home in yourselves. Act justly. Speak justly. Remember the depth of your own compassion. Forget not your power in the days of your powerlessness. Do not desire to be wealthier than your peers, and stint not your hand of charity. Practice forbearance. Speak the truth or speak not. Take care of yourselves as bodies, for you are a good gift. Crave peace for all people in the world, beginning with yourselves, and go as you go with the dream of that peace alive in your hearts. Blessed be, and have a wonderful, wonderful day and week. And we'll have our postlude by Joy. We're good. It's all good. Thank you. Okay, welcome everybody, and just join us for some snacks and coffee. Good to see you. Good to beverage for your friends.